Chapter 8 of The Spider by Fergus Hume. This recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 8 The Grief of Ida. Vernon was not the man to let the grass grow under his feet when there was anything to gain by hurry, and in this case the happiness of his whole life was at stake. The visit of Lady Corsoon to enlist him on her side with the bribe of supporting his suit for her daughter was one of those unexpected cards which fate deals us to win in the game of life. It was a veritable ace with which Vernon hoped to trump Maunders' trick. Hitherto the handsome scamp had had everything his own way. Now he was to find serious obstacles in his path. With Lucy's love and her mother's support the course of true affection might run smoother. The father might be gained over by playing on his instinctive dislike to Maunders and by the news, which Vernon had hitherto not thought worth imparting, namely that he had a chance of becoming a baronet. Moreover, since war had been declared between the two schoolfellows, Maunders would undoubtedly make himself disagreeable in any case. Already, acting treacherously, he had informed Lady Corsoon of the way in which Vernon earned his money, and it was probable that now he would inform others. Of course the young man wished to prevent this, for in spite of his defence of his profession, he was aware that the world does not look amiably on one who lives by learning the secrets of weak humanity, even when the aim is to preserve those same secrets from use by villains. But the difficulty was to seal Maunders' mouth, as the moment he noticed, and he certainly would speedily, that Vernon was favoured by Lady Corsoon, he would spread the scandal with a zeal born of the knowledge that his empire was slipping from him. Also he would strive to intimidate Lady Corsoon more openly, and it could not be denied but what her position towards her aggressively upright husband was a delicate one. Thus Maunders was the enemy both of Lady Corsoon and of Vernon. To crush him they therefore formed a secret partnership. In this unity lay their strength. The weapon Vernon proposed to use towards his dangerous foe was that supplied by the chance remark of Lady Corsoon that Maunders might be the Spider. When she departed with the assurance that there was nothing to be afraid of for at least 1 month, Vernon sat silently in his chair thinking over what had been said. After all, it did not seem impossible that Maunders should be his arch scoundrel, for whom the police were so eagerly seeking. To Vernon's own knowledge, the young man did not receive large sums from Mrs. Bedge, and he had no other source of income. Yet, as Vernon had seen, he contrived to live like a prince on nothing a year. Perhaps, like the amiable and talented Mrs. Rawdon Crawley, he managed to keep up his princely appearance by spending other people's money, that is, by getting deeply into debt. But Vernon knew that Maunders did not owe 1 penny. He came by the information by having, at the request of the late Mr. Dimsdale, searched into Maunders' private life some months previously. The old ex-police commissioner, seeing that his daughter was infatuated with the young man, hoped to learn something to his discredit, and so asked Vernon, whom he knew already as Nemo, to make an examination. Of course Vernon did not guess at the time that Mr. Dimsdale wished to find something to the discredit of an undesirable suitor, and merely thought that the old man was anxious to learn if Maunders was a fit husband for his daughter. In fact, Vernon believed that he was doing his old schoolfellow a good turn in probing his life. He certainly learned that Maunders owed nothing, and always settled his debts scrupulously, presumably on money allowed by Mrs. Bedge. So he presented his report to Dimsdale with the remark that Maunders, at all events, was an honest man. Now the case assumed a different aspect with Mrs. Bedge's confession of poverty, a confession which was supported as true by her anxiety to become Ida's paid companion. Since Maunders paid his debts and lived like a millionaire in embryo, how did he manage to fill his purse? Lady Corsoon had provided a very reasonable reply to this serious question. He was the Spider. "But hang him, he's not clever enough," muttered Vernon, rising to pace the narrow confines of his office at this point of his meditations. "He's cunning and smart and observant and unscrupulous, But the Spider is a genius and manages his affairs in a far seeing way which does not suggest Maunders. Conny is shallow in many ways, and for the present would sacrifice the future. No, the Spider never does that. He waits and plans and arranges his operations in such a way that he can never be captured. No, feasible though it seems, I can't see Constantine as that master criminal." But again Vernon reflected that when the trap had been arranged between him and the dead man the window of the library had been open, and, as Mr. Dimsdale had mentioned in his subsequent letter, with wrath, Maunders had called at that moment. In fact, he had been round the corner of the bungalow nearest to the library with the two ladies. Now, it was not impossible that in passing the library, light footed as he was, and Maunders trod like a cat, he might have lingered at the sound of voices. Thus he might have gained the necessary knowledge of the trap, which he had afterwards utilised to inveigle Vernon to the West Kensington house, that is, presuming he was the Spider, and the name of Lucy Corsoon used in the wire was the very name which Maunders, knowing Vernon's love for the girl, would employ. Finally, Maunders had been at the ball, and it would have been easy for him, masked and cloaked as he was, to steal into the library and commit the crime, afterwards mingling with the guests in all apparent innocence. On these grounds Vernon began to believe that Lady Corsoon might be correct in her assumption. But always there came the doubt that Maunders was too shallow to be the arch rogue. He was clever, but certainly not a genius, whereas the Spider was a Napoleon amongst the criminal fraternity. "In one way I can prove something," said Vernon to himself. "If Maunders did enter the library he must have been absent from the ballroom for some time. I shall go to Rangoon and ask questions without letting it be seen why I ask them. Then I can learn for certain about his movements on that night. Moreover, I can interview Miss Dimsdale and learn how she is disposed towards the Colonel. Finally, I'll see if he is right in thinking that Miss Hest's influence is harmful to her in any way." Having come to this decision, he repaired the ensuing day to Hampstead, fully determined to set his doubts at rest. A glance at the agony column of the Daily Telegraph had assured him that Lady Corsoon had carried out his suggestion. Under the initial X she asked for 1 month's time to consider the matter of S. This undoubtedly would be accorded to her, as it was the Spider's policy never to hurry his victims. He robbed them in a most graceful and easy going fashion, and so dexterously that his victims rather congratulated themselves that they had so honest a criminal tradesman to deal with. So Lady Corsoon's secret was safe for a month. Before the expiration of that period Vernon hoped to lay his hands on the rogue who had baffled the police for so long, but in his heart he did not expect to find Maunders in the grip of the law. At first Vernon was refused admittance by the butler, but on insisting and on sending in his card he was shown into the central hall. Shortly Miss Hest made her appearance with a smiling but somewhat serious face. She looked extremely tall and handsome in a black browed way as she advanced towards the visitor. "How are you, Mr. Vernon?" she said, shaking hands politely. "Is your business with Miss Dimsdale very important? She is not well to day. I have just been bathing her forehead with eau de cologne." "Oh, I have just come to make an afternoon call," replied Vernon easily. "I am sorry to hear that Miss Dimsdale is ill." Frances sighed. "She has never been the same since her poor father's terrible death. She loved him as dearly as he loved her, you know, Mr. Vernon, so the shock was great." "I quite understand. Still, after 2 months more or less of quiet, she surely must be recovering. At her age one does not remember for ever." "No, at our age one has longer memories, Mr. Vernon. But it is kind of you to call. Ida likes you very much, especially as you were such a friend of poor Mr. Dimsdale's. I think you might come in for a quarter of an hour." Vernon hesitated. "I don't wish to disturb Ida," he said doubtfully, "if she wants to be quiet." "Oh, she left the decision to me when we got your card. I am acting as a kind of nurse to the poor darling. Ida is just like my sister, you know." "But your professional engagements?" "They don't matter. I have made a good deal of money in one way and another, Mr. Vernon, you know. I can afford to take a rest. I want Ida to come down to Bowderstyke with me and stop at the Hall." It flashed into Vernon's suspicious mind that perhaps Frances wished Ida to fall in love with her brother. 10,000 a year would be very acceptable to Mr. Hest, if Colonel Towton's story was to be believed. According to him, the brother was not a millionaire, and what money he had he spent lavishly in helping the parish. He remarked about this to Frances as she led him through the door at the end of the hall and into the boudoir, where Ida was lying. "I hear from Colonel Towton that your brother is quite a philanthropist." Frances laughed. "Oh, the Colonel has been talking, has he? My brother would be quite annoyed, as he never liked to be praised." "Then he's not human," said Vernon bluntly. "He's human enough to be annoyed with me because I choose to earn my own living," said Frances bitterly. "However, let us see Ida, and then I'll tell you about my brother. In fact, I want to ask your advice." "Why should you think I was capable of giving advice, Miss Hest?" "Oh, you are so grave," she replied with a smile, halting at the door of the boudoir. "And Mr. Dimsdale, poor man, always said that you were so clever in making suggestions. Besides, you don't know the opinion Ida has of you. Ida, dear," she passed into the room, "here is Mr. Vernon." "Arthur," said the girl, who was lying on a couch near the window. "Oh, I am so glad to see you. I'm glad Frances did not send you away. She's such a tyrant as my nurse." "Perhaps you need a tyrant to manage you, Ida. You were always too impulsive and reckless of your health." "I think I have changed since poor papa's death. I don't feel reckless in any way now. I shall never get over it, never." Frances, who had taken some knitting to sit in a near chair, frowned as the girl spoke. "That's the way she goes on, Mr. Vernon, isn't it foolish? I want her to go out and enjoy herself." "As if I could, when poor papa is dead only 2 months," cried Ida, sighing. "Oh, I don't mean you to lead a gay life, but you shouldn't stay here day after day without sunshine." "I think Miss Hest is right, Ida," said Vernon gravely, scrutinising the pale face of the girl. "You are not looking well." "I don't feel well at all," she replied peevishly. "There's nothing organically wrong," put in Frances quickly. "The doctor said that Ida was perfectly healthy and only needed to go out and lead a happy life to become quite strong." "I shall never be happy again," said Ida with determination. Visitor and nurse, as Frances might be called, looked at one another. The girl evidently had made up her mind to be miserable. This was not a sensible attitude to adopt, but then Ida was not a particularly sensible girl. She assuredly was not brilliantly clever, although she possessed a certain amount of brains. Pretty in a doll like way, with her golden hair and blue eyes and creamy pink complexion, she was an excellent type of a charming, modest, playful English girl, who would make a good wife and a devoted mother. But there was nothing original about her, and being the spoilt darling of an elderly father, she was subject to moods. She was sick or well, merry or sad, just as the fit took her. At one time she would fatigue herself with theatres and dances and tennis tournaments, and again, with a revulsion of feeling, would lie on the sofa all day reading novels. Poets would have called her an April lady, of sunshine and rain, but an ordinary human being would have found her trying. It said a great deal for Miss Hest's true affection that she put up with so whimsical a being. A weathercock was nothing in comparison with Ida Dimsdale. Why a sober, elderly military man like Colonel Towton should desire to make such a featherhead his wife was a problem which Vernon was trying to solve as he stared at the girl on the sofa. Ida's mood since the death of her father had been to play the invalid. Certainly she had suffered a shock, as was natural, but time had softened the memory of the tragic death, and Vernon approved of Miss Hest's desire to get the girl away to Yorkshire. "You ought to go to Gerby Hall, Ida," he remarked after a momentary silence. "A few weeks in the open air would do you all the good in the world." "That's what I tell her," said Frances severely, "but she won't come down to Yorkshire as I suggest. I shall end in going away altogether." Ida stretched out a pretty hand and caught that of Miss Hest. "Oh, no, Frances, darling. You know that I cannot live without you. I must have a companion." Vernon thought that this was a good opportunity to advance Mrs. Bedge's request, which he had promised to bear in mind. "There is a charming old lady who offers to become your companion," he said gently. Ida stared and shuddered.
"I don't like old ladies. Who is she?"
"Mrs. Bedge. She asked me to speak to you because she has lost a lot of money, and is therefore willing to accept a salary as your companion." Frances laid down her work and clasped her hands. "Why, Ida, it's the very thing for you, dear. Mrs. Bedge is so old and so sedate. Then I can attend to my business, knowing you are all right."
"Frances!" Ida sat up on the sofa and looked reproachfully at her friend. "How can you talk so? I like Mrs. Bedge, who has always been very kind to me, but there is no denying that she is extremely dull. Besides, I have told you that you can have whatever salary you like to ask, making up for losing all your engagements."
"And I replied that I wished to be independent," said Miss Hest stiffly. "I don't like living on anyone. That is why I left Gerby Hall. But about Mrs. Bedge, dear, it is really a capital idea."
"I shan't entertain it for one moment, and when Miss Bedge comes I shall tell her so. With thanks, of course," added Ida as an afterthought. "Why couldn't she speak to me direct?"
"Well," Vernon laughed, "it is rather a delicate subject. However, if you won't have her you won't, so there's no more to be said. And might I suggest, Ida, as you really are looking better with the colour that has come into your cheeks at the suggestion, that you should pull up the blind and make the room look more cheerful." Ida jumped up lightly and did as he asked. Her mood had changed with the advent of this tactful young man.
"Is there anything more your lordship requires?"
she asked with a saucy curtsey. "I should like a cup of tea. You are not hospitable," replied Vernon, delighted by the change of her manner. Ida touched the button of the bell.
"You were always greedy, Arthur."
Then, when the footman appeared, she gave the necessary orders.
"I believe you called less to see me than to get your tea," she ended, laughing quite in her old girlish fashion.
"Ida, I don't believe you are ill at all," said Vernon, scrutinising her.
"Her imagination makes her ill,"
put in Frances, who was knitting industriously.
"She believes that she is sick, and therefore she is sick." "That is Christian Science," laughed Ida, sitting in a chair instead of returning to lounge on the sofa. "Perhaps you are right, dear, but of course I have fretted a great deal over poor papa's health. But fretting will not bring him back," she ended with a sigh, and her face clouded over again.
"What you want is bright society," Vernon assured her hurriedly.
"And you suggest Mrs. Bedge?" was Ida's ironical retort.
"No, I never thought that she was the right companion for you, as she is too staid and solemn. But I have discharged my conscience by putting her request to you. I never for one moment thought that you would entertain it." Ida looked at him inquiringly.
"You think that I am right?"
"Yes, I do. Miss Hest is a much better companion." Miss Hest bowed to the compliment with a grave smile. "Oh, I mean what I say, my dear lady. Take Ida down to Gerby Hall and play the tyrant as much as possible by forcing her to keep in the open air all day. She will return quite cured."
"I don't think I should mind going to Yorkshire," said Ida pensively, as the tea was brought in. "And from what Frances says, Gerby Hall must be a delightful old place. But then my sojourn would be disagreeable, as Frances is not on good terms with her brother."
"Say that he is not on good terms with me," said Miss Hest coolly. "I have nothing against Francis, save that he objects to my being independent. But he is very just, and does not wish me to remain always absent from the Hall. I can go down, and can take anyone down, on conditions." "What are they?" asked Vernon, accepting a cup of tea.
"That I and anyone I bring bother Francis as little as possible. In fact, when I am at the Hall, Francis usually goes to New York while I remain, and even when he returns he sees almost nothing of me, as I keep out of his way. He isn't a bad fellow, and of course I should speak well of my twin brother." "Are you very like one another, Frances dear?"
"Extremely. In face and form we can mystify anyone when we are seen together, but in disposition we are quite unlike one another. I am more egotistic than Francis. He is a philanthropist and devotes all his money to improving the parish. 6 or 7 villages owe everything to him."
"He keeps them all going, you mean?" suggested Vernon, idly leaning back. "Not exactly, but 2 years ago there was a great dearth of water, which has frequently occurred during the dry weather. Francis determined that it should not occur again, so he obtained permission and engaged a clever engineer to construct a reservoir at the top of Bowderstyke Valley." "That was a big work to undertake, and must have cost heaps of money." "Francis can afford it," said Miss Hest indifferently. "Our grandmother, from whom he inherits the estates, left a lot of ready money, and Francis is a clever speculator. He works hard at stocks and shares, and is always in touch with his broker in London. But all the money he makes he spends in improving the parishes around. He has repaired several churches, and has built a poorhouse, and also a small hall for entertainments. He and the vicar work hand in hand. Then, of course, this reservoir is his crowning work, as it supplied water to at least 6 villages." "Oh, what a good man he must be," said Ida thoughtfully. "Here am I with all my money doing nothing." Bearing in mind that he fancied Miss Hest wished to marry Ida to her brother, Vernon quite expected to hear her endorse this praise. Miss Hest, however, received the tribute very coolly. "Francis is vain," she remarked, "and desires public applause. Perhaps that's why he spends all his money in public charity." "Does he never take any pleasure in other ways?" asked Vernon. "I think he finds his pleasure in his home and surroundings. Still, he goes away to York and London and Paris for weeks at a time, and enjoys himself in some dull way. I am sure it is dull, as Francis hasn't got any spirit for a lively life. However, if Ida comes down she can judge him for herself, but I don't think we'll see much of him, and for my part I'm very glad. I always escape from Francis's society whenever I can. We don't get on well together at all. Rather odd, isn't it, considering we are twins?" "Oh, I don't know, Miss Hest. Twins often are the opposite in disposition, as they are the replica of each other in looks." Frances looked up with an approving smile. "You have described my brother and I to the life," she said, nodding. "Colonel Towton has a place near Gerby Hall, I believe?" "Yes, The Grange it is called, a quaint old mansion 3 miles distant from my brother's property, higher up the valley in fact, and on a rise to the right of the reservoir. Colonel Towton wasn't pleased with the construction of the dam, as it spoilt the view from his house, and then he always declares that if the dam broke the valley would be swept from end to end by the force of the water. But I don't think any accident of that sort will happen," ended Frances emphatically. "The dam is extremely solidly built, and will last for many a long day." "I think I should like to go to Bowderstyke, if only to see Colonel Towton's house," said Ida unexpectedly. "He told me such a lot about it." "I thought you didn't like Colonel Towton," said Vernon smiling. "There!" exclaimed Frances, dropping her knitting, while Ida flushed. "Didn't I say that Mr. Vernon would remark how fickle you are, Ida?" "Fickle?" echoed the young man, looking puzzled. "You know that Ida was in love with Mr. Maunders," went on Miss Hest, while Ida still blushed and appeared embarrassed. "She never gave her poor father any peace, and always wanted to marry him. Well, since the death she has taken a positive dislike to him, and can only find good in the Colonel." "Ah," said Vernon meaningly, "that would have pleased poor Mr. Dimsdale. He greatly desired to see Ida the Colonel's wife." "I begin to think papa was right," said Ida in a low tone, and turning away her face. "I did like Mr. Maunders very much. I suppose I really was in love with him in a way. But since papa's death he has scarcely been to see me, and has not acted at all sympathetically. Now the Colonel has called constantly, and has been so kind and so sweet that I " "That you love him?" ended Miss Hest coolly. "I'm not sure. He's awfully nice and is devoted to me. I daresay if I saw much of him I might " "Well," Miss Hest interrupted again, "I hope you will, as I am sure Colonel Towton would make you an excellent husband. He is handsome and distinguished and sensible enough to guide you, my dear." Frances laid her hand on Ida's knee. "I shall be glad when you become Mrs. Towton, as then I shall be free to go back to my work. People are sure to say if I stay with you that I'm actuated by mercenary motives." "What nonsense!" said Ida quickly. "Why, you will not even let me give you a present." "I can buy presents for myself," said Frances obstinately, "and, since I left Gerby Hall to be independent, I certainly don't intend to play the part of a bribed or paid companion."
Ida's eyes filled with ready tears.
"How cruel you are, Frances," she wailed.
"I am sensible and reasonable," said Frances firmly, knitting with an obstinate mouth.
"I really love you, dear, but I can't sacrifice my independence to be a hanger on. All the same, until you have a husband, I don't feel justified in leaving you, so feather headed, to your own devices." "I am not so weak minded as you think," flushed Ida crossly. "Yes, you are, my dear. You can't say whether you love Colonel Towton or Mr. Maunders. You don't know your own feelings." "Yes, I do. I really believe I love Colonel Towton. I know that I did before Constantine appeared. Then I took a fancy to him. Now that fancy has gone, and I again love the Colonel. Yes," Ida paused meditatively, "I am sure that I love the Colonel." "Pooh, pooh! Just what I said. You don't know your own mind." "I wish you would carry out your first impulse, Ida, and marry Colonel Towton. He's a good man, and Maunders isn't." This came from Vernon. "I feel that," muttered Ida, "but he fascinates me, and after all he is trying to learn who killed my father."
"So am I," said Vernon drily, "yet you don't love me. Not that I want you to," he added hurriedly and colouring. "But about Maunders. Has he ever said anything to you likely to reveal the name of the assassin?"
"No. Why do you ask?"
inquired Ida, and even Frances stopped knitting and looked steadily at Vernon.
"Do you suspect that Mr. Maunders knows more than he admits?" asked Miss Hest.
"No, no, no. Of course I don't," answered Vernon hastily and leading cautiously up to the purpose of his visit. "But he was in the house when the murder took place, and might have seen some stranger present who would be The Spider."
"I don't think so, and I don't see how he could, seeing that everyone was masked. If he had seen any suspicious character, I certainly should have known of it at once."
"Why you rather than anyone else?" asked Vernon quickly.
"Well, you see, Ida was in one of her freakish moods on the night of the ball, and gave Mr. Maunders the cold shoulder, consoling herself with the Colonel all evening." "I did so because papa did not wish me to pass my time with Constantine."
"I daresay, Ida," responded Miss Hest rather acidly, "but you asked him to the ball, notwithstanding your father objected. At all events, Mr. Vernon, as Mr. Maunders was cold shouldered, he came to me, and I had the burden of him from 10 o'clock to the time Ida discovered the murder, at 1:15 midnight. Mr. Maunders never left me alone all that time, so if he had seen anyone suspicious he would have told me." "Quite so, quite so," murmured Vernon absently, and thinking that here was a very good alibi for Maunders, and the stronger since it was given unconsciously by one who did not know the reason for putting it forward. "I daresay The Spider came in by the window," he remarked in louder tones. Miss Hest made a significant gesture.
"I don't know how he came or how he went," she said, nodding towards Ida, who had grown pale, "and the police seem to be able to discover nothing. But you might see Mr. Maunders and learn if he had any suspicions that a stranger was present." "That would be useless in the face of what you tell me. He would have spoken to you had he been doubtful," said Vernon courteously, "and " "There, don't say anything more. Don't you see that Ida is on the verge of fainting?" Miss Hest caught Ida's hands. "Poor child, they are quite cold. You had better go, Mr. Vernon." "Yes." He rose promptly. "I am sorry that I spoke of the murder. Don't think anything more about it, Ida, but go to Yorkshire and recover your health." Ida nodded faintly. "Yes, I shall go. It is best for me to get away from this tragic house."
And Vernon quite agreed with her. Chapter 8. Rancho San Diego, California. Chapter 9 of The Spider by Fergus Hume. This recording is in the public domain. Chapter 9. Witchcraft. While Vernon was having his interview with Ida and her companion, Colonel Towton went on a little expedition of his own. Ever since the discovery that Ida had been to Diabella, Towton had been anxious in his turn to pay a visit to the famous Bond Street fortune teller. Ida, as the Colonel had told Vernon, apparently was suffering from the effects of what she had been told by this fashionable Witch of Endor, although what had been said Towton could not find out. Miss Hest and the girl had both held their peace on the subject, notwithstanding that the former had talked generally on the wonderful powers of the woman. In fact, she had seriously advised Colonel Towton to interview Diabella and search out the future for himself. The soldier had laughed, as he was not given to dabble in occultism. Nevertheless, he had made up his mind to seek out the seeress, if only to discover indirectly what those methods of devilry were which had so strongly impressed Miss Dimsdale. Towton, to put it plainly, went less as a client than as a spy. Considering that Ida had no very strongly marked personality, it was wonderful that the Colonel should be so deeply in love with her. He was clever in his own way, and not without brain power inside and outside his own particular military profession. His bravery was undeniable, his tact considerable, and he had left the army on account of family affairs, with the name of one who had cut short a brilliant career unnecessarily. Towton assuredly would have risen to be a general had he not retired when the family estates came into his possession. But now that he had abandoned his profession, his one aim was to marry and lead a quiet domestic life. He did not wish for a clever wife, or a wealthy wife, or a particularly lovely wife, as he was too matter of fact to be romantic. His dream was of a peaceful hearth, and a house perfectly managed by a gentle wife. In Ida he believed that he saw the helpmate he so greatly desired, one who would make her husband's will her law, and who would be a cheerful companion. Her moods he believed to be the result of lack of guidance, and he flattered himself that when she became Mrs. Towton he would be able to render her less freakish. Ida's nature was so impressionable that he thought it could be easily moulded, and in this he no doubt was right. Many of the girl's faults were due to the over indulgence of her father, and to the lack of a firm hand to lead her in the right way. She would have welcomed a master having one of those natures responsive to suggestion. And, in an unconscious way, the Colonel appealed to her as a strong, kind hearted man, who could shelter her from the storms of life better than anyone else could. In point of fact, the two were made for one another, and, but for the intrusion of Maunders, their course of true love would have run smooth. However, Colonel Towton was extremely obstinate, and having decided that Ida was the very wife he desired to preside over his dinner table, he was determined not to let her be snatched from him by any rival. He admitted with some dread that Maunders was a formidable wooer, and moreover guessed, with the keen instinct of a man in love, that Francis Hest had too much control over the girl. For one thing, she had induced Ida to go to Diabella, a thing Towton would never have permitted had he been able to help it. He knew from his Indian experience only too well that there is truth in occultism, and that an impressionable being, such as Ida truly was, could easily be possessed by strong suggestion. He had no reason to doubt Miss Hest, and did not think for one moment that she was his enemy in any way. But, with the assistance of suggestions from Diabella, she might lead Ida into unhealthy ways. And all these dealings with the unseen with which psychics have to do were unhealthy in the Colonel's very material eyes. Already, as he had seen for himself, the visit to Diabella had upset Ida, so whatever the harm done might be, it was necessary to undo it by proving the woman to be a fraud. Towton therefore ascended the stairs to the consulting room of Diabella, with the intention of learning if the fortune teller was a humbug. Once assured of that, he resolved to explain her methods to Miss Dimsdale, and so prevent her trusting as truth whatever the woman had said. Then Ida's indignation at being duped, as the Colonel believed she had been, would probably shake Miss Hest's position. Towton felt certain that Frances was more friendly to Maunders than to himself, and at one sweep he hoped to get rid of both. Afterwards Ida would be more willing to become his wife. Diabella's offices, as they might be called, consisted of two rooms, a small outer one entered directly from the passage, and a spacious inner one which overlooked the street. As Towton tapped at the door of the prophetess, his thoughts suddenly flew back to his many years of sojourn in the Far East. For the moment he could not think what had detached him so unexpectedly from England, until, on stepping across the threshold of the now open door, he became aware of a strong, pungent scent, impossible to describe. At once he noted it as that smell of the bazaars which runs without a break from Port Said to Hong Kong. Perfume is the strongest of aids to memory, therefore Towton's thoughts had flashed back over many years to various Indian experiences. His body was in England, but his soul was in the East, nor did the sight which met his eyes dispel the illusion. The room he entered and the attendant who welcomed him were both Egyptian in looks. The small compartment resembled an ancient tomb, as the walls and ceiling were painted vividly with hieroglyphics glowing in crimson and blue and yellow and emerald green. Through a stained glass skylight overhead a dim coloured light streamed just sufficiently to reveal the weird looks of the room. It was faked, of course, but very cleverly faked, as the Colonel secretly admitted, even to the attendant, who, apparently a true Eastern, was attired in a garb which one of Pharaoh's fan bearers might have worn appropriately. The floor was covered with linoleum painted to resemble marble, and there was a quaintly shaped table of ebony, 2 or 3 antique and uncomfortable chairs, copied from furniture of the 19th dynasty, and a weird looking teak sofa, covered with bright yellow cushions. What with the grotesquely painted walls, the sparsity of furniture, the dim light, the scented atmosphere, and the strangely dressed attendant who salaamed profusely, Colonel Towton felt as though he had stepped at one stride across the Mediterranean to a resuscitated Memphis. The man was a slim, straight native, with handsome, haughty features of the Brahmin type, and Towton wondered that he had broken caste to cross the black water. He had keen black eyes which took in the looks of the English sahib in a single flash, notwithstanding that he stood with crossed arms and downcast eyes. Towton wondered if he spoke English, and for the sake of an experiment addressed him in Tamil. The dark skinned man replied in very fair English, with an inquisitive glance at this stranger who spoke the Indian dialect so glibly. "Is your mistress in?" inquired the Colonel, speaking Tamil.
"Within, Sahib, and she waits," was the reply in Anglo Saxon.
Immediately following these few words, Towton was led into the inner room, and the attendant closed the door after him, leaving the client alone with Diabella. The room was decorated much in the same tomb like fashion as the other one, but there were mummies standing round the wall at intervals in their richly adorned coffins, and the 2 windows looking on to Bond Street were draped with rich Eastern stuffs to entirely exclude the light of day. But several lamps, burning perfumed oil, dangled from the ceiling, and the room was filled with a mellow radiance, eminently suited to the object for which it was used. Towton shrewdly surmised that the peculiar decorations, the exclusion of daylight for the use of artificial illumination, and the highly scented atmosphere which prevailed even more strongly here than it had done in the outer room, were all meant to daze the senses of Diabella's clients, so that they might more readily credit her assertions. It was all cleverly conceived and carried out. The woman herself was seated at the end of the room under a kind of canopy, on an uncomfortable ebony wood chair inlaid with ivory. Before her was a tiny square table of the same sombre wood, with twisted legs, and on this stood a large crystal the size of a small orange. Diabella was seated in a hieratical attitude, with her hands on her knees, like some stone god, and wore a stiff, straight robe of mingled black and yellow, which made her resemble a viper. But her face struck Towton most, as she apparently wore an entire mask modelled in wax from some actual Egyptian mummy. This was surmounted by the well known head dress of harsh black ringlets combed straightly to the shoulders. The mouth of the mask was partially open, so that the fortune teller could speak easily behind it. With her dead looking face and motionless attitude, Diabella looked exactly like the mummies which flanked her right and left. And right and left also, in tall iron tripods, flamed some spirits which cast weird lights on her uncanny appearance. Nothing better could have been designed to impress the weak minded, and in that temple of illusion, and from the lips of such a strange creature, the boldest might be excused for believing the impossible. Even Colonel Towton felt an unaccustomed shudder, as though he were in the presence of the unseen.
"You wish to consult those who dwell in darkness about the future?"
asked the sorceress in a strange metallic voice, as inhuman as were her looks. Towton smiled scornfully and twisted his moustache. He had quite recovered his momentary obsession by that perfumed atmosphere, and sat down with a cool air. "You should speak English to be perfect," he scoffed. Diabella disdained to notice the jeer.
"Would you have me look in the crystal, or spell the cards, or read the hand?"
"None of the three, thank you," said Towton drily. "Do you really possess the power of reading things?"
"I can read the past, the present, and the future. I can tell all that is permitted to be told by the powers. You are an unbeliever."
The Colonel chuckled. "Wrong, first shot. Having seen a good deal of this sort of thing, although," he glanced round the room, "scarcely so dressy a place, I believe that some gifted people have certain senses at command, if not under control, with which they can foretell things. I quite appreciate your remark about the powers permitting and forbidding, as I am aware that such is the case."
"I did not say that you were an unbeliever generally," said Diabella, trying to recover her lost ground, "but that you did not believe in me."
"You did not put it precisely in that fashion," retorted Towton. "However, I may as well have my guinea's worth. Is there any reason why I should believe in you?" he demanded contemptuously. The quiet voice replied indifferently.
"Yes. I have not held your hand, nor have I contacted your atmosphere closely. Still, I am sufficiently in touch with you to state that you bring a woman in your aura."
"In my what?" asked the Colonel, wilfully dense.
"The aura of your magnetism streams from you radiant as a rainbow. In it is standing the thought form of a girl. She is not very tall. She has blue eyes and golden hair, and you love her. Am I right?"
"I shan't say," replied the Colonel, secretly surprised to hear this description of Ida and the statement of his feelings towards her. "Humph!" he made a half unwilling admission. "You have some psychic powers after all. Tell me more."
"Give me your ring," commanded Diabella imperiously. "It is impregnated with your magnetism, and will thus suggest your colour."
"My colour?" repeated the Colonel interrogatively, and removing his signet ring to place it on the ebony table. Diabella picked it up and held it in the hollow of her right hand.
"Every human being in the unseen world around has a colour which is the prevailing hue of the karmic body tinted by desire. I can thus recognize you as you appear on the astral plane, and so can read your karma of the past, which appears in the astral records. Thence I can deduce your future for good or evil, in a great measure correctly."
"Then you can't be certain that what you tell me is true?"
"No. Under certain circumstances, when the High Ones permit, the future is revealed beyond all doubt. But those circumstances are connected only with spiritual enlightenment. Otherwise those who have the sight merely deduce what will happen by reading the karma of the past, which can be discerned in the astral light."
"Your claims are certainly more modest than I expected," said Towton, somewhat interested, "and if you can tell me my past life correctly, I shall credit more or less of your prophecies. You know my name?"
"Richard Towton."
"Ah, you got that from my letter asking for an appointment. But I have a middle name which I don't use. What is it?"
"Richard Henry Towton is your full name."
"Correct. Where was I educated?"
"At Wimperley Public School, then at Sandhurst."
Towton nodded. "You might be certain of Sandhurst, as I am a soldier, but Wimperley is good. Go on."
"You joined your regiment 25 years ago, and shortly after joining it was ordered to India. You were stationed at Bombay, afterwards at Travancore. You fought in Burma, where you met Martin Dimsdale and became intimate with him. You won a D.S.O. in the Vikram expedition, and—"
"All that," interrupted the Colonel politely, "with the exception of my meeting with Dimsdale, you might have read in the newspapers. Why did I retire from the army?"
"Your cousin died and left you the Grange at Bowderstyke in Yorkshire. You gave up your profession so as to get the estates in order. They had been sadly neglected by your cousin, who was a drunkard."
"That is impolite, but true," said Towton with a grimace. "Go on."
"You wished to marry."
The Colonel shrugged his shoulders. "Every man wishes to marry."
"You wished to marry a girl called Ida Dimsdale," went on the passionless voice, and Diabella refrained from making any comment on the remark.
"Ah, now you are becoming interesting. Why do I wish to marry Ida Dimsdale?" The reply was unexpected.
"You desire to get her money in order to recover certain lands sold by your late cousin."
"That is a lie." Towton grew a trifle red and spoke sharply. "I love Miss Dimsdale and would take her without a penny."
"That is how you will have to take her," replied Diabella coldly, and without insisting upon the truth of her previous statement.
"Nonsense. Miss Dimsdale has a large fortune."
"You think she has 10,000 a year. She has nothing."
Towton felt an astonishment which he could scarcely conceal, and wondered if Diabella had spoken in this way to Ida. "What do you mean?"
"I mean that this girl is not the daughter of Martin Dimsdale."
"What?" Towton rose in his surprise. "How dare you say that?"
"I am only reading what I see," said Diabella wearily. "Your fortune and this girl's is connected. Therefore I know of her past."
"Past! Past!" fumed the Colonel, sitting down again. "She has no past in the sense you mean. She was born in Burma and her mother died shortly afterwards. Dimsdale sent her home to relatives, and afterwards she went to school at Hampstead. 5 years ago he returned to settle in England, and she has been with him ever since."
"Quite true, but you are foolish to tell me so much, as now you will say that I merely echo what you have mentioned."
"I have certainly not mentioned that she is not Dimsdale's daughter."
"No, yet it is true. Her name is Ida Menteith, and her father was a major in a native regiment. Menteith, with his wife in Burma at a station called wait until I get the name."
Diabella stopped for one moment, then spoke out triumphantly.
"It was called Goorkah Station, and was besieged by the Dacoits."
"Yes, I remember the station, but not a man called Menteith."
"This happened before you went to India."
"What happened?" asked Towton bluntly.
"What I am about to tell you. Dimsdale was then a police commissioner. He loved Mrs. Menteith, who returned his love and hated the husband."
"I don't believe that for one moment. Dimsdale was a good fellow who would never make love to another man's wife."
"Many good fellows do that," said Diabella sarcastically. And Dimsdale did love Mrs. Menteith so deeply he did not save the husband's life when he could have done so."
"That's an absolute lie," insisted Towton angrily. "How dare you malign a dead man who cannot defend himself?"
"Martin Dimsdale's friend, George Venery, who is a merchant at Singapore, can prove the truth of what I say."
"Rubbish! How do you know?"
"I read all I am telling you in the Astral Light," said Diabella. "If it displeases you, I need tell no more."
"It does not so much displease me as make me wonder at your imagination." Diabella still preserved her immobility.
"Write to George Venery and you will find that I have spoken the truth."
"It seems incredible," muttered Towton doubtfully. "Of course, I know that there is great truth in occult matters, but what you say is too precise to be anything but what you must have learned, perhaps from this man."
"No," replied the fortune teller. "I never heard the name of Venery before, and I have never been to Singapore or even to Burmah. I only read what I see. How else should I know?"
The Colonel made a gesture of disbelief. Although he believed in the unseen, from various Indian experiences, he could not credit the story of this masked woman. "Go on and tell me more," he said at length. "Later I can write to Mr. Venery and verify your statements."
"Ida Dimsdale is Menteith's daughter," said Diabella quietly. "She was born in Rangoon when her father was besieged in Goorkah Station. Dimsdale was in the neighbourhood with a force and hastened to relieve his friend, but he purposely delayed his approach so that the station might be taken and Menteith killed."
"I don't believe that for one moment. Dimsdale would not act so wickedly."
"He did act in that way, as Venery can tell you. It was his behaviour that caused a breach between them. Dimsdale hoped to get rid of Menteith and so marry the wife. His plan of delay was successful, and the station was taken by the Dacoits. Menteith was crucified, and his perfidious friend arrived when he was dying. Menteith was buried at Goorkah Station, and Dimsdale returned to Rangoon, hoping to marry Mrs. Menteith now that the obstacle was removed. Mrs. Menteith, however, weak after the birth of her child, died in a few days. Then Dimsdale was stricken with remorse and brought up the child as his own. She has passed for his daughter, and as his next of kin inherits the money. But she is no relation, since Dimsdale did not leave a will, and—"
"How do you know that Dimsdale left no will?"
"I might have seen it in the papers," said Diabella coolly, "but I did not, for to my sight the hidden things of Dimsdale's life are revealed. But you can understand that if you marry Ida you will get no money with her. The truth will be made known, and Lady Corsoon will inherit it, as it is but right she should do."
Towton rose so hurriedly that he knocked over his chair. "I can't stand any more of this," he declared impetuously. "All your occult business is a sham, and you are making up lies. I insist upon your removing that mask so that I may know who you are." Diabella rose, tall, straight and stiff, but did not seem disturbed.
"Beware, Colonel Towton. If you advance a step it will be the worse for you."
The military man laughed and stepped forward. "I must know who you are, as I intend to make you pay for telling these falsehoods."
"They're true."
"They're lies. Now I know why Miss Dimsdale was agitated because of her visit to you. You told her this story also."
"What if I did? The truth—"
She flung up a hand as the Colonel took another step forward.
"Stand back, I tell you."
"Take your mask off," he insisted, and stretched out his hand. Diabella swerved to one side and avoided his grasp. Then she dropped into her chair, pressing the arms of the same hard. Immediately, from the mummies set around the room, came a most unearthly crying, which confounded the Colonel, not expecting such a tumult. The weird room rang with thin wailings and dismal cries. It was evident that some mechanism connected with the chair produced these noises. The place was filled with clever contrivances to intimidate nervous people. But Colonel Towton was not nervous, and after his first startled pause he sprang forward again to seize the seated figure. At all costs he was determined to unmask the sorceress and learn who she was. Then he might hope to find out how she had become possessed of these facts concerning Dimsdale's past life, or whether these same facts were simply lies designed to perplex and mystify. Diabella never moved as Towton came towards her, and the Colonel soon knew why she was thus certain of her safety. Before he could reach the hither side of the ebony table, rapidly as he moved, he was gripped from behind by two gigantic hands, and twisted round sharply to face a tall and burly Hindu, arrayed in a white robe and wearing a white turban. "Let me go, you dog," muttered Towton in the Tamil dialect, and set his teeth. Diabella clapped her hands, and the two men closed in a fierce struggle. As they swayed around the room the ebony table was upset, and the woman cried out a sentence in an unknown language in her metallic voice. The next moment the native unloosened his grip on the Englishman and stepped back. "Will you go now?" demanded Diabella quietly, and addressing Towton. "No," he cried fiercely. "I want your mask removed." Whether Diabella gave a sign or not, Towton was never able to say, but she must have given a signal, for just as the words left his mouth, the native sprang forward with the leap of a tiger, and the next moment Towton found a silk handkerchief around his neck. It flashed across him that in this way had Dimsdale been killed, and then, with the tightening of the handkerchief, came almost insensibility, or rather a dazed feeling which bewildered his brain. He had a faint feeling of being led out of the room, and of hearing a door closed. When he recovered his senses he found himself seated on the floor of the passage, quite alone. His first thought was to tell the police what had occurred; his second, to conceal the adventure. "I shall consult with Vernon," he thought, and walked unsteadily down the stairs, feeling his neck somewhat sore, but otherwise uninjured. End of Chapter 9. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California. Chapter 10 of The Spider by Fergus Hume. This recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 10 Mystery. It was quite 3 days before Colonel Towton was enabled to have an interview with Vernon. He certainly wrote to him at once, but on receiving no reply he telephoned, only to learn that his friend had been unexpectedly called from town on the same evening. Towton therefore had to possess his soul in patience, and remained in his rooms recovering from the assault, and this took some little time. The attempt at strangulation by the burly Hindu, who was a different person to the slim doorkeeper, had caused the Colonel's neck to swell, as the flesh was bruised and chafed. His windpipe also felt painful, owing to the strong compression, and for 24 hours he had found it difficult to swallow with ease. Towton recognised, only too uneasily, that he had been within a short distance of actual death, and perhaps would have been strangled outright had not Diabella, as he verily believed, stopped her too zealous servant. Naturally she did not wish for a client's death, lest the police should interfere and put an end to her lucrative trade, which was assuredly a very paying one. Meanwhile the Colonel received a letter from Ida saying that on the ensuing day she was going down to Yorkshire with Miss Hest. There, breathing air like champagne, and enjoying perfect rest, undisturbed by callers, she hoped to recover her spirits and health within a month, the time of her proposed stay. But what pleased Towton most in the letter, and what caused him to blush like a girl, was the hope Ida expressed that he would come down to his country seat while she stayed at the Hall.
"You have often told me of your beautiful home," wrote Ida amiably, "and one of my reasons for staying at Gerby Hall is to see the Grange. If you should take a fancy to run down, perhaps you will show it to me yourself, as I hear from Frances that the house is full of historical interest."
There were a few lines more to the same effect, and it really seemed as though Ida wished to become acquainted with her future home. At least Towton looked at the matter in this way, and his spirits rose accordingly. Maunders apparently was out of favour, and Ida had returned to her first love. Without being unduly conceited, Towton was very well satisfied that the girl had loved him before the handsome scamp had come on the scene. Then the latter's looks and charms of manner had infatuated her to an alarming extent. Now, and the Colonel sincerely hoped that such was the case, her momentary aberration, as it might be called, had passed away, and she was holding out the olive branch of complete reconciliation. But that Towton still felt unwell after his rough and tumble encounter with the Hindoo, and but that he wished to consult Vernon about the matter, he would have gone down to Yorkshire at once, so as to bask in the sunshine of Ida's eyes. But he put a restraint on his feelings and decided, not without a struggle, to remain where he was. In connection with various ideas which had occurred to him since his visit to the Bond Street fortune teller, it was imperative that he should consult with someone and ventilate various theories, which might or might not elucidate various mysteries. Therefore Towton read and smoked and played patience in his comfortable rooms, watching the passing of time with open eagerness. On the third evening, and that was a Saturday, Vernon made his appearance at 8 o'clock. He entered with perfect coolness, and found himself facing a very impatient man.
"Did you wish to see me, Colonel?" he asked quietly. "I found a note at my chambers requesting me to call at once."
"Do I wish to see you?" echoed Towton, jumping to his feet and wringing Vernon's hand heartily. "Why, my dear fellow, I have been sitting here on pins and needles for the last few days. What the deuce took you out of town so unexpectedly? I beg your pardon. I should not inquire into your private business. Sit down and have a cigar. The whisky and potash is on the table at your elbow."
"Oh, my business is not private," replied Vernon, taking a comfortable chair and a very excellent cigar. "All the world will know in a week or so."
"Know what?"
"That my uncle, Sir Edward Vernon, is dead, and that I am a titled, well-to-do man, worth knowing."
"I never knew you had an uncle," said Towton, staring.
"It's not unusual for men to have uncles," said Vernon drily. "I didn't buck about the relationship, as we were not the best of friends. A family quarrel between my father and Sir Edward, you understand. However, when I returned from a visit to Miss Dimsdale, I found a letter from my uncle asking me to come to Slimthorpe, near Worcester, as he was very ill. I packed up and went by the evening train, and there I have been for the last 3 days."
I suppose I ought to congratulate you."
"Well, you may. Sir Edward can't last more than a week, and he leaves me heir to his title, his mansion, and a few thousands a year. He's not a bad old fellow either," went on Vernon meditatively, "and I am sorry he is dying. I don't deny, however, that his death will make a great change in my fortunes for the better, as is obvious."
"It will enable you to marry Miss Corsoon," said the Colonel, nodding.
"Yes."
Vernon thought of his interview with Lady Corsoon and replied briefly.
"Uncle Edward is 80 years of age,"
he added apologetically,
"so he can't be said to have been cut off when he was green."
"He's not cut off yet," answered Towton with a shrug. "I don't want to throw cold water on your prospects, Vernon, but these old fellows have wonderful recuperative power."
"I shall be glad if he gets better," said Vernon emphatically, "and now that we are friends I may be able to make his life more cheerful. He has a dismal time all alone in that barrack of a house. But I don't see why I should bore you with all this family history."
"I do," said the Colonel unhesitatingly. "It's because you and I have been drawn into closer friendship by our common acquaintance with Maunders, who is playing fast and loose with the 2 girls we love. We have had to make common cause against the enemy, and so are forced to speak freely. Besides, you are a good chap, Vernon, and I don't wish to work alongside a better man." And leaning forward, the Colonel gave his friend's hand a grip.
"Would you do that? Would you say that if you knew that I was a private detective, or, to soften the term, a private inquiry agent?"
"What?"
Towton nearly jumped out of his chair. "As I had no money when my father died," explained the young man steadily, and my uncle would have nothing to do with me, I turned my powers of observation to account, by setting up as Nemo of Covent Garden, to hunt down criminals and to help people keep their secrets when threatened by blackmailers. Mine is a perfectly honourable profession, I assure you, Colonel, but you may have your prejudices."
"Well," said Towton after a pause, "I don't deny that I care little for detectives, or too much like the bloodhounds of the law, but I'm quite sure that you were driven to take up the business, and I'm also quite sure," added Towton emphatically, "that the business as conducted by you is all that can be desired in the way of honour. Why did you tell me?"
"If I hadn't, probably Maunders, when he found that we were working together, would have told you. It struck me as a wise thing to take the wind out of his sails."
"There's something in that," admitted the Colonel, twisting his moustache, "and I am glad that I heard of your profession from yourself. But how did your friend Maunders find out what you kept secret?"
Vernon shrugged his shoulders. "Who knows? He seems to have a wonderful nose for smelling out things to his advantage."
"To his advantage? Come now."
"I assure you, Colonel, it is so. He wished to become my partner. Lately, however, he has changed his mind, and he promised to hold his tongue. To my cost," went on Vernon slowly, "I found that he has not done so, as he told Lady Corsoon."
"The devil he did! Then good bye to your chances of the daughter."
"Do you think so, when I shall soon be Sir Arthur Vernon, with an eligible country seat and 3,000 a year, more or less?"
"No, that alters the case. It whitewashes you, as it were. Ho, ho!" Towton laughed maliciously. "That will be one in the eye for Mr. Constantine Maunders. And serve him right. Why the deuce does he play the lover with two women at once? I congratulate you, Sir Arthur."
"Colonel, you are premature."
"Never mind. It's just as well to take the bull by the horns and time by the forelock. I congratulate you, Sir Arthur, for you will marry Miss Corsoon and wipe our friend's eye. He won't have either girl."
"Certainly not Lucy, if I can help it," said Vernon hotly. "But what about Miss Dimsdale? I rather think, from what I saw of our interview of 3 days ago, that she inclines to you, Colonel."
"Ah, Miss Dimsdale." Towton nursed his chin in the cup of his hand. "It is about Miss Dimsdale, amongst other things, that I wish to see you."
"What other things?" demanded Vernon bluntly.
"Diabella, for one."
"The fortune teller? Have you seen her?"
Towton put his hand to his neck with a wry smile. "Yes, the jade. She nearly had me strangled."
Vernon dropped his cigar. "Strangled?"
"Yes."
The Colonel unloosened the white silk scarf he wore round his throat and leaned forward to show a fading black mark round it.
"You see, I assure you I have scarcely been able to swallow since I saw you last. That damned Hindoo nearly did for me."
"Hindoo? Did a Hindoo attempt to kill you?"
"Rather, and jolly nearly succeeded."
"But why?"
"Because I wished to tear off the false mask worn by Diabella, a waxen or papier mâché sort of face that makes her look like an Egyptian, so as to be in keeping with her room, I suppose."
"Why did you wish to tear it off?"
"Because she said certain things, and—" Towton stopped as Vernon rose quickly and began to walk about the room. "What's up now?"
"Colonel, do you remember how you gave it as your opinion that Dimsdale had been strangled by a Thug?"
"Ah," said Towton drily, "the same idea strikes you also, I see. Well, Diabella may have something to do with the matter. I asked you to see me in order that we might thresh it out. Now that I know you are Nemo, I am all the better pleased, as your professional knowledge may link this and that together."
"This and that?"
"Bond Street and Hampstead," said the Colonel impatiently. "That is, you may see a connecting link between this beastly nigger attempting to strangle me and the actual strangulation of poor Dimsdale in his library."
"I can't see the link," said Vernon thoughtfully. "Diabella knows nothing about Dimsdale."
"On the contrary, she knows a great deal. By the way, didn't you tell me that Dimsdale was being blackmailed by that confounded Spider?"
"Yes." Vernon stared and wondered why the question was asked. "He had a secret, which the Spider learned, and intended to tell it to me after the capture of the beast.
but the spider killed him, and so " Vernon shrugged. "I wonder if what Diabella told was the secret," muttered Towton, stroking his chin. "Did Dimsdale ever give you to understand that his secret, whatever it might have been, was a disgraceful one?"
"On the contrary, he said that he didn't mind anyone knowing what it was," said Vernon promptly. "Only he added that the spider had embroidered actual facts, and so might make things hot for him were the added facts to become known to the world at large."
Towton nodded. "I thought so."
"Thought what?" asked Vernon impatiently.
"That Diabella and this mysterious spider are in league."
Vernon dropped into his chair, placed his hands on his knees, and stared very hard at the lean brown face of the soldier. "What do you mean?"
"Listen and I'll tell you. I am quite sure that you will come to the same conclusion." And Towton in an incisive manner related what had taken place in the fortune teller's weird apartments. The effect on Vernon was to produce an extraordinary emotion of mingled dread and relief. Dread, because he saw deep and dangerous villainy at work, and relief, as now he espied a gleam of light in the darkness surrounding the Rangoon crime. He made no remark, either during Towton's recital or after it, so that the Colonel grew impatient. "Well, what do you make of it?" he asked sharply.
"I agree with you that Diabella and the spider are in league."
He rose, much agitated.
"Perhaps Diabella is the spider all by herself."
"The spider I always understood to be a man."
"It is presumed so, but who knows? Diabella may be the real originator of these crimes, and may employ men to collect her fees. Then, of course, as a popular fortune teller, she has every opportunity of learning people's secrets, for those who consult such creatures always give themselves away. A few skilfully put questions and a few dexterous prophecies would make people loosen their tongues. Then a clever woman, putting two and two together, would soon make the four, which means blackmail."
"But how the deuce could she learn this secret of Dimsdale's?"
"Well, the secret is connected with the Far East, and you say that Diabella employs two Indians in her fortune telling business. She may have learned it from them, since the older man, the one who attempted to strangle you, may have been a soldier in the Burmese war, and so may have been connected with Dimsdale. Then, again, Diabella may herself have been in the East, and may have learned about Ida not being Dimsdale's daughter."
"Do you think it is true?"
"I fear so, as the secret of her birth and adoption by Dimsdale is not one that any man would mind being made known. But the embroidery to which our poor dead friend alluded consists of this assertion, that he wilfully delayed coming to the assistance of Menteith, and for the sake of the man's wife acted in a David and Uriah the Hittite manner. That embroidery is indeed worth blackmail. But it isn't true. I believe Dimsdale's assertion rather than Diabella's story. She knew the facts and improved upon them in the way that I have mentioned."
Colonel Towton nodded. "Then Ida, not being Dimsdale's daughter, and there being no will, cannot inherit her presumed father's money as next of kin?"
"I think not. It will go to Lady Corsoon, as Diabella asserted. She is Dimsdale's sister and only relative. It will be a good thing for Lady Corsoon," murmured Vernon, thinking of the gambling debts, "as it will make her independent of her miserly husband."
"There is another thing to be thought of," said the Colonel gravely, "and that is the blackmailing of Ida."
"Oh, do you think that her health is suffering from that?"
"Yes, I do. She went to the fortune teller, and what she heard has made her ill. She probably was told the same story as I heard, and knows that she is keeping the 10,000 a year wrongfully from Lady Corsoon. This being the case, and Ida being a sensitive girl, it is no wonder that she is disturbed and ill. Her conscience is fighting between keeping the money and giving it up. Then Miss Hest may be forcing her to keep silence. Otherwise, as she is the sweetest girl in the world, I feel sure she would speak out and give up the fortune."
"She may not believe the story."
"Certainly she may not, but it must have sown doubts in her breast, and if left to herself she would perhaps come to me or you, asking us to resolve these doubts. But Miss Hest "
Colonel, I don't think you are altogether just to Miss Hest. She is really a kind hearted, decent woman, and is not after Ida's money, as you imagine. She wants Mrs. Bedge to become Ida's companion. or for Ida to marry you so that she can go back to her reciting."
"Does she want Ida to marry Maunders?" asked Towton shrewdly.
"No. I think she fancies you will make Ida a better husband. No, Colonel, Miss Hest's conduct is above reproach, and if she knows about this wild story by Diabella, she will advise Ida for the best."
"In what way?"
"Well, it is no use Ida telling you or I or anyone else the tale unless she is sure of the truth. According to Diabella, this man Venery in Singapore can substantiate the story. So under the guidance of Miss Hest, provided, mind you, she knows the story, Ida may have written to Venery. If Venery says that Ida is not Dimsdale's daughter, I daresay the girl will see her supposed aunt and surrender the fortune. Miss Hest, undoubtedly, as you say, exercises a certain amount of control over Ida's weaker mind, but she is a good woman and assuredly is not a fortune hunter."
"It may be as you say," assented the Colonel grudgingly. "However, it is plain that Diabella knows something of The Spider and something of the murder, since she is aware of Dimsdale's secret."
"You don't think she read it in the astral light? I know you believe in occult matters."
"To a certain extent," said Towton drily, "but I don't believe that the Unseen ever furnished so detailed a story. Communications from the next world are apt to be scrappy. What's to be done?"
Vernon quickly decided. "We'll divide the burden," he said promptly. "You write to night or to morrow to George Venery of Singapore, asking how much of this yarn is true, and I shall call on Diabella."
"Why not consult Inspector Drench and have her arrested?"
"It wouldn't be a bad idea," pondered Vernon, "and yet it is not wise to act with too much haste. After all, we can't get a search warrant, as you have no witness to your assault, and the woman can easily deny the story of Dimsdale which seems to connect her with The Spider. I shall go on my own and secure more evidence upon which to get a warrant, if not for her arrest, at all events for a search through those rooms of hers. Some evidence regarding The Spider, if indeed she is connected with him, as seems extremely probable, may be found concealed there. I'll call to morrow morning," ended Vernon rising, "in the character of a superstitious client."
"And I'll write the letter to Venery of Singapore."
In this way the matter was decided and the burden was divided. Vernon went away with the conviction that by chance the Colonel had struck upon the much wished for clue which would lead to the identification of the famous Spider. Certainly he might be jumping to a conclusion, but taking all that was known into account it looked extremely probable. And if it was true it behoved him to act cautiously, lest The Spider at the 11th hour should slip through the fingers of the police. For this reason, and until he was positive, Vernon did not think it wise to call in the assistance of the law. First, it was necessary to prove the collusion of Diabella and The Spider, so that if she were not the scoundrel herself she would at least be able to identify him beyond all doubt. Second, even if his identity were proved, it would be no easy task to arrest so slippery a criminal. Like the celebrated fox in the fable, The Spider had 1,000 tricks which he would use to better advantage than the animal. The fox in the story of Æsop was caught, but it was probable, unless the very greatest care were used, that The Spider would escape. Already the police had experienced his subtlety, and regarded the arch scoundrel as a very wary and dangerous bird, who was not to be caught by putting salt on his tail. Colonel Towton, being less experienced in the trickery of the criminal classes, was more hopeful of success, and next morning settled down to write the letter to Venery of Singapore, quite confident that all the mysteries were on the eve of solution. He quite expected to hear from his correspondent that Ida was not Dimsdale's daughter, but he was quite sure that the embroidered facts of the pointed delay in the rescue of Menteith were false. Assured of this, he was quite willing to marry Ida as the daughter of a poor soldier, and hand over the fortune to Lady Corsoon. Love was everything to the Colonel at this moment, and nothing else mattered. But just as he reached the second page of his letter, Vernon burst into the room with a half vexed and half triumphant air. He told his news without any delay. "I believe you are right about Diabella being connected with The Spider, Colonel," he said. "She has shut up her rooms, and has cleared out bag and baggage."
End of Chapter 10. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California. Chapter 11 of The Spider by Fergus Hume. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 11 The Needle in the Haystack. It was big news, which meant more than at first sight appeared, since the implication was of depths below depths and veils behind veils. To be quite plain, the unexpected flight of the fortune teller, for it was nothing else, hinted at the truth of Towton's suspicions. Had there been nothing but the mere assault, Diabella could have faced that, and could have even counted upon the Colonel doing nothing, since an unbiased witness was lacking. The flight was not caused by the incident which had taken place in the Bond Street rooms, but by the fear that something dangerous might peep out from behind it. And what could this something be? On the grounds of Diabella's story and the Hindoo's attempted strangling, but a dread lest the Spider should be traced. "I am perfectly certain that you are right, Towton," said Vernon, sitting sideways on the table and swinging his legs. "Only the fear of her connection with that blackmailing scoundrel being traced could have scared her into disappearance." "She has really gone?"
"Really and truly. Remember, she had 3 days to make herself scarce, but so afraid was she lest you should take action, that she decamped on the morning of the 2nd day."
"How decamped?" questioned Towton, laying down his pen.
"She sent the Hindoo to surrender the lease. Badahur his name is."
"The native who tried to choke me?"
"No, the doorkeeper. I was precise to ask if he was lean or stout. The lean one came to surrender the lease."
"And his name is Badahur. Well, that's something worth knowing. But how did you get your informant to talk, and how did you find any person in authority to explain matters?"
"That was easy." Vernon slipped off the table and into a chair. "I called on the plea of wanting my fortune told by Diabella. Instead of Badahur opening the door, a neat little maid servant made her appearance, and informed me that Diabella had retired from the business, which had been taken over by a certain American prophetess. I asked to see the lady, and I did."
"You don't think she was Diabella unmasked?"
"Not from your description. You told me Diabella was tall. This woman was short, and the voice, instead of being metallic as you described it, was rather musical, although disfigured by a Yankee twang. This new sorceress, from New York City, as she told me she was, could never have spoken English without the twang."
"It might have been assumed."
"Not it. I can tell the true from the false," said Vernon emphatically. "Mrs. Hiram G. Slocum is a genuine American, sure enough. Besides, her ideas of surroundings and those of Diabella differ. The last desired weird decoration and furniture, a mask, an Egyptian dress, Oriental attendants, and so forth. Mrs. Slocum's idea is that people should not be frightened, but should have their future told in a motherly, old fashioned way, amidst rural fireside granny scenery. She intends, so she told me, to transform the Egyptian rooms into the semblance of a rustic cottage interior, with a cat and a humming tea kettle, rafters with strings of onions, and flower pots on the ledges of Bond Street windows turned into casements. It's rather a clever dodge," reflected Vernon, "as people will be at their ease directly, and so will talk freely and listen comfortably."
"And Mrs. Hiram G. Slocum herself?"
"A motherly old thing in a mob cap and a stuff dress and a voluminous apron, and a woollen shawl over her shoulders. I daresay she has dressed for the old cottage interior part, for she was seated in a wooden chair which didn't fit in with the Memphis decorations, and knitted a homely stocking."
"What did she tell you about Diabella?"
"Very little, because she knew very little."
"Do you believe that?" asked the highly suspicious Colonel.
Vernon shrugged his shoulders.
Every one tells such lies nowadays that I never believe any one, but Mrs. Slocum seemed to be genuine enough. However, I'll soon prove that, as I intend to have her watched by a man upon whom I can depend. I shall learn in that way if she has business relations with our masked friend." "What did she tell you?" asked Towton again.
"Well, it seemed that she heard about Diabella wishing to retire from business, and went to see her. Diabella denied that the rumour was true, but promised Mrs. Slocum the first refusal of the rooms and goodwill, though how one can transfer fortune telling clients beats me. However, Mrs. Slocum retired and left her address, somewhere in Pimlico, where she was wasting her talents on maid servants and suburban people. Diabella sent Bahadur to her there, and the lease was duly transferred for a sum of money. I believe Bahadur took Mrs. Slocum to the city and interviewed the landlord's lawyer. However, it was all done fair and square." "But Diabella must have signed the consent to the transfer." "So she did, under the name of Isabella Hopkins, which may or may not be her real name. At all events, she took the rooms as Miss Hopkins and signed that name on the transfer. Mrs. Slocum never saw her, at least without the mask. She was as you saw her when Mrs. Slocum called at the rooms, and didn't show in the lawyer's office."
"But the lawyer must have seen her."
"Well, he did, and I went to see him. He's a stiff old buckram creature, who declined to impart anything about Miss Isabella Hopkins, as he wanted to know why I wished to know. And, of course, on the face of it, you can see, Towton, that I couldn't gratify his very natural curiosity."
"But why not, if we are to catch Diabella?"
"We haven't got enough grounds to go upon," said Vernon, shaking his head. "I think it is best to let her fancy we don't suspect anything, and then we may be able to capture her unawares. She's connected with The Spider, if not that gentleman himself, I am sure, and your visit and behaviour which led to the strangling attempt had given her a fright. But if we keep silent her suspicions will be lulled, and she may reappear."
"Surely not."
"Oh, I think so. Fortune telling is an invaluable way of learning secrets, and Diabella must be very useful to The Spider, or to herself if she is him. She won't surrender her position without a struggle. It's too paying all round, my dear fellow."
"But she did surrender it."
"Only because she lost her head for the moment and thought you might bring the police on the scene for the assault. That would lead to unpleasant questions being asked, which might result in heaven knows what revelations. Fortune tellers are not in good odour since the campaign of a certain halfpenny paper against them." The Colonel leaned back in his chair, reflecting, while Vernon rose to walk up and down the room for the purpose of stretching his long legs. He lighted a cigar and went on talking lightly. "You never saw such a heap of clever dodges as this Diabella has to impress the weak minded. Those mummies they are all faked, by the way have reeds inside them leading to their mouths, and Diabella, by pressing on the arms of her state chair, could send a stream of wind along to make them squall."
"And they did squall," said Towton musingly. "I never heard such a devilish row in my life. What else?"
"Oh, some arrangement by which when the room was darkened the interior of the painted walls were illuminated to reveal the Egyptian figures as walking and sitting skeletons. Then there's an apparatus to make thunder, and flashlights for lightning, to say nothing of ingeniously arranged draughts calculated to make anyone's hair rise in the necessary darkness when he or she felt a cold breath fanning him or her. I wonder Diabella didn't send her clients stark, staring mad."
"It sounds like a fraudulent spiritualistic medium, Vernon, and only confirms my suspicions that Diabella was not a genuine occultist."
"But do you really believe anyone has such powers?" asked Vernon curiously.
"I really do," said the Colonel promptly, "strange as it may appear. In India I have seen too much of the unseen to doubt. There are certainly gifted people who can see and who can control forces of which the average person knows nothing. Oh, yes, I believe, but what's the use of talking? I can never make you believe, and I don't want to." Vernon shrugged his shoulders again and buttoned up his coat.
"As you say, it doesn't matter," he answered. "However, Diabella has vanished with her 2 satellites, so there's nothing more to be done at present."
"You give up the hunt?"
"I said at present. No, I shall lie quiet until Diabella reappears."
"She won't if she's wise."
"She will if she's daring, and I shrewdly suspect that she is."
"Do you believe her to be The Spider?"
"I do, and I don't. I really can't say. But if not the Rose, she is near the Rose. All I can assert with safety, Colonel, is that if we can lay hands on this witch in grain, we'll learn who murdered poor Dimsdale."
"God grant that."
"Amen to that pious prayer," was Vernon's reply as he left the room.
Towton duly finished his letter of inquiry to Venery of Singapore, and having posted it, went cheerfully about his usual business of pleasure, that is, as cheerfully as a man in love well could do. At the Colonel's age, love was rather a serious matter, since he had taken the disease badly, as is invariably the case with middle aged men. Some individuals constantly let their emotions trickle out to expend themselves in trifling love affairs, amusing for the moment. Others dam up the passions for years until they burst through the barrier, to sweep everything before them irresistibly. Colonel Towton was one of the latter, but not being entirely blinded by his late born infatuation, he did not deem Ida perfection, as a hot headed youth would have done, and he foresaw that, as Mrs. Towton, she would need guidance and firm control. Hitherto, for want of both, she had run wild, but the materials were there, out of which, as Towton put it to himself, he could build a model wife. That she was frivolous, rather than strong minded, was a point in her favour, as the Colonel desired to mould wax rather than to hammer iron. So if Ida only consented to marry him, he hoped for a calm and contented domestic existence, undisturbed by aggressive romance. And with his home loving, self controlled nature, Towton infinitely preferred the outlook from an unemotional point of view. As to the money, he cared little for the possible loss of that, although he could not deny but what Ida's yearly thousands would have come at the right moment to effect improvements on the Bowderstyke estate. Towton was too prosaic and level headed to despise the power of the purse. But on the other hand he was not at all grasping, and was quite satisfied to marry a girl with no dowry but her beauty and sweet nature. All the same, he intended to inform himself fully of the truth by inquiring, as he had done, from the man Diabella had mentioned as her authority. The Colonel had no notion of letting Ida's money benefit Lady Corsoon if he could help it. Of course, if it was proved to be legally hers, he would be the first to see that she had her rights. On the other hand, should Ida turn out to be Dimsdale's daughter, Towton made up his mind that the 10,000 a year would be joyfully used for the improvement of his family property. With these thoughts to employ his mind he waited very patiently in London, considering that he was a man of actions rather than a dreamer of dreams. Later on, when Vernon had coaxed Diabella from her hiding place, Towton intended to travel to Bowderstyke to see his beloved. He had every belief that during his absence Vernon could manage the affair which interested them both so greatly. For the next few days the Colonel saw nothing of Vernon, but while in the tablinum of the Athenian Club he unexpectedly came face to face with Mr. Maunders. The scamp looked singularly handsome, and was dressed carefully as usual, but the sight of a snake would have been more pleasing to the worthy Colonel. He did not like Maunders, and moreover resented him as a somewhat dishonourable rival, for no one could respect a man who pointedly wooed 2 women at one and the same time. Towton therefore nodded coolly and crossed to the central table to pick up a service magazine. As he did so, Maunders sauntered to his side and slipped into a chair near to that one which the Colonel had taken. "Have you had any news of Miss Dimsdale?" asked Maunders amiably. "No," retorted Towton, opening his magazine as a hint that he wished to be left alone. "She is still in Yorkshire with Miss Hest," persisted Maunders. "So I understand," was the stiff reply. "I believe she will remain there for 1 month." Possibly she will."
Maunders was not discouraged. "Have you any message for her?" he asked.
"Why do you ask?" demanded the Colonel, sitting up abruptly.
"Because Francis Hest, you know, the brother of Miss Dimsdale's friend, has asked me down to Gerby Hall. I'm going there at the end of the week for a few days. I thought you might have a message for Miss Dimsdale."
"There is such a thing as the post," said Towton, exasperated by the young man's cool assurance.
He took up the magazine again, then hesitated and threw it on the table. Adverse as the Colonel was to discuss his private affairs with anyone, and least of all with Maunders, whom he so frankly hated, he felt that he ought to take advantage of this chance to learn exactly what was Maunders' attitude towards Ida.
"Am I to understand that you are engaged to Miss Dimsdale?" he asked sharply.
"Why should you think that?" asked Constantine negligently.
"Why, indeed? Considering that one day you profess to be paying your attentions to Miss Corsoon, and the next pay your addresses to Miss Dimsdale. But as you are going down to Gerby Hall, it looks as though you inclined to marry the latter young lady."
"No," said Maunders indolently, and looking at Towton through half closed eyelids. "I'm going to see Francis Hest, who is a friend of mine. But I daresay Miss Hest and Miss Dimsdale find it dull, so I may be able to amuse them a trifle."
"I am quite sure of that," said Towton sarcastically. "Your social qualifications are well known. But I ask you if you are engaged to Miss Dimsdale?"
"No, I am not, nor am I likely to be." This was good news, but Towton could not be sure if Maunders was speaking honestly.
"Then you intend to marry Miss Corsoon?" said the Colonel.
"I do. But I don't see why you should trouble yourself about my private affairs," said Maunders, insolently cool.
"It was not I who sought this interview, but as you choose to speak to me, I have every right to mention a subject which concerns us both."
"And concerns Vernon also."
"Precisely," said Towton with great emphasis. "It is useless to disguise the fact, Mr. Maunders, that we are rivals, and
"Pardon me, no," interrupted the young man quickly. "I have been refused by Miss Dimsdale, so the field is open to you."
"Ida refused you?" muttered the Colonel, stupefied.
"Strange, is it not?" replied Maunders lightly. "But such is the case. I asked her to marry me, and she hinted at a previous attachment. I presume she meant—" Towton threw up his hand and coloured through his bronzed skin.
"We will not mention names, if you please."
"I don't mind. But you know how the land lies, so far as I am concerned, that is. But you will have to reckon with Francis Hest."
"Miss Hest's brother?"
"The same. Francis and Francis, twins with twin names, you may say. She is devoted to this more than her brother, and wishes him to marry money."
"Do you mean to say that Miss Hest has taken Miss Dimsdale down to Gerby Hall so that she may meet Mr. Hest?"
"Yes. He's not a bad looking fellow, exactly like his sister, who is handsome in an imperial way, as you have seen. In fact, if you see Francis, you have seen Francis. The brother isn't very well off, as he has spent all his available cash in philanthropic works, and constructing some confounded dam to supply water to several villages has nearly ruined him. But Miss Dimsdale's money will therefore come in very acceptably. But I fear Hest will waste it in helping the poor. He is ridiculously crazy about doing what he calls good."
"It's ridiculous," muttered the Colonel crossly. "Miss Dimsdale doesn't know this man Hest."
"Francis will see to that. Now that Miss Dimsdale is at the Hall, she will have every opportunity of seeing him. Miss Hest will throw them together on every occasion. Upon my word," Maunders rose and stretched himself, "were I you, Colonel, I should go down to Gerby Hall and look after matters."
"Thanks for your advice," said Towton, picking up the magazine again. "And good day to you, Mr. Maunders."
"This is what comes of my trying to help you," observed the young man with a shrug. "I do what I can, and you throw my philanthropy in my face."
"No, no."
Towton's conscience smote him, for really Maunders had done him a distinct service, and also he had announced that Ida had refused him, which was excellent news.
"I thank you for what you have told me. It is probable that I shall go down to Gerby Hall at the end of the week."
Maunders nodded. "I may meet you there," he yawned, and sauntered away with a bored air, which was rather overdone.
As a rule he was alert and full of life, so it looked as though this languor was assumed for some purpose, and not a good one, if the man's selfish nature was to be taken into account. It wanted 3 days to the week end, so Towton really intended to take the northern journey. He had never trusted Miss Hest, and it was quite probable that as she had discouraged the wooing of both himself and Maunders, her intention was to secure the heiress for her too philanthropic brother. Of course, if Towton could prove to the twins that Ida had no money, it was possible that no further plans would be laid to entrap her. Money was what Francis Hest required for his lord of the manor schemes, and money was what the sister desired to secure for him. But considering that Frances did not get on well with her brother, and that they rarely met, it was strange that she should be so anxious to serve him. Unless, indeed, the two had come to an agreement that if Francis married the supposed heiress, Francis would share the income. On the whole, Towton thought it would be just as well to go down to The Grange for a week or so, and pay a neighbourly visit to Gerby Hall. He would at least learn how much of Maunders' tale was true, and perhaps might induce Ida to accept him, since she had refused his handsome rival. "Gad, I'll go down on Saturday," decided the Colonel. And it happened that before Saturday he received a letter which made him even more anxious to visit his family seat. It came from Ida, and she pointedly asked him to come down and see her. Amongst other things, she wrote that Francis Hest had gone away, and that she had only seen him twice at Gerby Hall.
"Frances and her brother don't get on well together," went on Ida in her letter, "and are rarely together. When he is in, she is out, and vice versa, like the little old man and woman in the Weather Cottage. I only saw Francis for a few minutes each time, and I don't like him much, although he greatly resembles Frances. But he is more gloomy and quite a misanthrope. Nor do I like Frances so much as I did, as she seems inclined to take the upper hand with me, and wants me to do exactly as she wishes. Lately she has been urging me to marry Mr. Maunders, and told me that he was coming down to stop for a time. Besides, there is a housekeeper, Miss Jewin, who is a double-faced woman, I am sure, and looks quite dangerous. She fell in ecstasies over a photograph of Mr. Maunders, which he gave Frances, and told me presumptuously that she thought we made a handsome couple. In fact, I don't like this place at all, and I wish you would come down and stand by me."
At this point the Colonel laid down the letter to think. Apparently Maunders was lying when he stated that he did not wish to marry Miss Dimsdale, and that Frances wished to secure the heiress for her brother. He told one story and Ida another, and of the two Towton preferred to believe that of the girl. The letter went into general details about the beauty of the country and the dismal gloom of the Hall. Towton gathered indirectly that Miss Hest was keeping a close watch on Ida, and that the girl was beginning to resent this over emphatic influence. In fact, throughout the letter there sounded a note of alarm, as though Ida was both uncomfortable and uneasy. She had certainly asked Towton down to stand by her, and when she had finished the epistle he was quite decided about travelling by the Saturday train as he had arranged. But the contradictory stories told by Ida and Maunders puzzled him greatly. More than ever he mistrusted Miss Hest, who seemed to be playing a deep game for the winning of Ida's fortune. But the Colonel chuckled to think of her disappointment when she learned that Ida was not entitled to the money, always provided that Diabella had spoken the truth. As two heads are better than one, and as Towton was working in consort with Vernon, he promptly sought out his friend and laid the letter before him. Also he detailed what had taken place in the tablinum of the Athenian Club between himself and Maunders. Vernon heard the Colonel's narrative with great attention, then gave his opinion after some reflection. "There is some devilry under all this," he said, laying a finger on the letter, "and Miss Hest seems to be working in conjunction with Maunders. He says one thing and Ida another, so it is difficult to know exactly how matters stand." "I believe Ida." "Well, on the whole, so do I think." Vernon paused, then added abruptly, "I don't trust Maunders, you know." "Neither do I." "In that case, let us act exactly opposite to the way in which he suggests." "How do you mean?" questioned the Colonel doubtfully.
Maunders wants you to go to Yorkshire. As he is going himself, he would naturally want a clear field, if indeed Miss Hest is supporting him in this design on Ida's fortune. Therefore he has some reason, and you may be sure that it is a bad one, to get you down."
"I can look after myself," said Towton sturdily.
"Quite so, but we have to look after Ida. Don't go to Yorkshire."
"But Ida wants me to go. See how urgent her letter is."
"I understand. All the same I think it wiser for you to remain."
"Until when?"
"Until I can corner Diabella," replied Vernon, and ended the conversation.
CHAPTER XII. Rancho San Diego, California.